Rigsters here, back with a traditional YouTube video on Assetto Corsa Competizione, 5 helpful tips and suggestions for anyone. In these 5 tips, I will discuss tips and strategies that will help anyone that's regardless of skill level or knowledge of sim racing in general. So let's get right to it. My first tip on getting better at Assetto Corsa Competizione is information. Yeah, I know. Some people are like, you what? What information? Why would I need information? Well, information regardless of what game you play or what genre of game you play is very important. The sites that I will refer to is this video have very helpful insights on various topics such as what tire pressure is recommended for GT3 or GT4, what are recommended wheel lock settings. For the latter, wheel lock settings typically is more useful for the console version of this game, but I've found as I'm playing the PC edition, this wheel lock setting tip can also make the car behave in a different manner. Now, to avoid too much complexities with wheel settings, I'd recommend on the wheel driver settings, whether it's Logitech or Thrustmaster, or direct drive unit, keep them at the default and adjust them in the controls panel in the game. That way, regardless of console version, you can start here, and if that doesn't work, go to the wheel driver. And for the links for recommended tire pressure, why it's very critical to understand and learn how that comes into play, I will put it up on screen here, and also we'll have it in the description box down below, kind of like how every other YouTuber says it's like, everything's down in the box below. Well, I'm going to also put it on screen here. The second helpful information page I would recommend looking into is car setups and pit stops from the unofficial ACC wiki. Now, that doesn't mean it's like a shady site or anything, it just means it's not an official wiki or fandom page. However, the information on there is relevant, and there's a lot of information of like what the setups can do, what are brake pads. It has a very good sense of generalities of what the settings and bindings can do. So now we'll move on to tip number 2 is a suggested group list of Discord community groups that I would recommend to consider joining. Within these groups, I have learned and even found information that you can chat or drive with depending on your time zone or availability is very helpful. One of the following, and this is also in the box, I'll put them in the box on the screen, and also, you know, the stereotype, down in the boxes below, scroll down, kind of meme, is the first one I've actually started with and learned from, and I occasionally done a few races with them too, and I actually plan on partaking with them again once they open back up registration. They're taking a summer break as of the time of this recording on 6/30/2022. Octane Online Racing requires signing out Google Sheet forms, but once you go through that process, it's not overly complicated. You just have to go through their form fill outs so they know what skill level and what you are, who you are, and what you like to do. Then once you do all that, it's pretty much you just see what's available. They have endurance, sprint, and team events, and also occasionally will drive with other people as well. It just depends on the time and league you're in. The next one that I recently joined, ironically before the third one I'll mention, is Sim Racing Alliance, otherwise known as SRA. They have a different sign-up process and a different initiation process. They have a hot lap server. They have to do about 3 to 4 validated, aka no Ricky Bobby going off the track and jumping curbs like a rally car driver. Laps so they can be done at any time, solo, that you can pair with their leagues. They don't have as many time zone availabilities as the other two. They keep it to like 1 or 2 different time zones. And they also, just like all the other two, with the third one being mentioned soon, they have sprints, endurance, and driver swap or driver team up events as well. However, as of filming, I was unable to join any of the official races, but I did practice and still chat and talk with them, and they're a pretty cool group to talk and hang out with as well. The last one that I'll mention is Sim Racing 604. Otherwise, they call them as the 604 for short. They also have, like the other two, many different leagues, and they use what's called Sim Racing GP. They do require having an account set up and activated and validated, which they also have a page on their Discord community, and they have people that can help you through all that process. The SRA, Sim Racing Alliance, does not have that. And I don't think Octane Online Racing has it, but it's not as mandatory. But Sim Racing 604 is mandatory to have an account linked and set up with that process as well. Now, the last important thing to know on this second tip is particularly related to sim racing in general. When you join these leagues, not all of them, but many of them require your real name. Screen names can be acceptable in certain leagues or unofficial, like for fun events, but it's kind of like a trust thing as well, and it can be a hurdle. Believe me, I was a little bit taken aback by that too. Most games, you're like, what? What real name? But it's the primary reason behind it is they don't want to necessarily have the poor volunteers or marshals trying to review race incidents or trying to assist people with really long-winded names like Super Fluffy Cat I Ate a Lamppost 24 overtakes book reader McCaskey from high school 26. You know what I mean? It gets a bit of alphabet word soup. It's also to try to hold one accountable and prevents more trolling, I would say, because in this game, or games of this nature, it's not like Assetto Corsa Competizione, unless if it's specified, typically do not encourage or want people to deliberately ram it into each other or causing demolition derbies. Forza or BeamNG, this games or type of games, it's not. So, I'll head on to the third tip. Tip number 3. Heads up optimizing. Yeah, it may be boring or lame, but optimizing your heads up display, otherwise known as HUD, is very important. Whether it be having a pit menu hotkey on your wheel, I have it set to PS on my Thrustmaster T150, for example, which when you go into controls and you scroll down here, yeah, so for example, for me it would be button 13, but it can set this to any button on the wheel. Or if you have one of those fancy rigs or higher end wheels or whatever that have multiple more buttons than you can think of mounting to anything, that would be ideal. So another thing you want to do is you have to decide if you want to use the default in-game HUD, which is pretty sufficient, but in my case I actually started using a customizable HUD that have down in the link in the description below, but I'll post it on screen here. It's a weird word. It's armamentario. It's a race assist toolbox, and I'll show you real quick what that looks like. I'll just go to drive real quick. So this is what it looks like without the customized HUD on. I should be able to display it while recording. Oh no. Great, creator incompetence. I can't show it while it's recording a screen. Isn't that lovely? But there is actually stuff there. I just, due to that incompetence, it doesn't show. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a screenshot image show you what it looks like. And I'll just edit that in there. Because, well, apparently in my creator incompetent moment, it didn't really show what I intended. Alright, so as I show that, this is what it can do in this image right here. So what I have for this mod enabled under as favorites that automatically opens when I hit open all. You can set this to whatever you want, but I recommend having HUD, session, fuel, damage, drive, tires, and time to have under favorites and open all. And you can manipulate this with the mouse. The main thing you want to do while you're doing all this is to make sure that before you set this up is to go into options, video, and they recommend not having full screen on. Now if you turn on full screen, you may not be able to alt tab and adjust the widgets that it comes with. Now you don't have to do it this way, but this is something I would recommend looking into if you really like it or not. I'll also would say, before moving on to the fourth tip, is under the HUD. I see this happen a lot with people, and some leagues do require this, that you must have this on at all times. HUD circuit map. The default is enabled, and here's why. Q, great for greater incompetence. Alright, so this is what the half map looks like. Now you might be saying, Riggs, that doesn't seem like to be a problem. Well, here's the problem when you don't have it on full. Near line of sight on the map, and yes, it's a video game, but this is important, you can't see what's going on ahead or behind you as much. So if a car crashes like half a mile or half a lap in front of you, for example, and you have it like this on the default, you can't tell where that car is. You don't even know where the incident happened. Or if somebody spins out or, you know, crashes by accident. Which it happens. I've done it. Other people have done it too. You can't see anything. So that's why you want to go to Options, HUD, and Circuit Map, go to Full. And then you go to Drive. Now, you're the red dot. You can see all the other dots driving around. You can see if they're under yellow flag or white flag, which is danger or caution, respectively. Or caution, danger. Yeah. Great. You know what I mean. So that's pretty much what you want to do, regardless of if you use the default in-game HUD, which is sufficient for most, but you could fiddle around with this stuff. But I highly recommend, so you don't have this as a problem when you do these league races or just driving around with people. This is like a godsend. It really helps a lot of track awareness, and that is important if you want to not be known as a Ricky Bobby meme racer bumping into everything, or people for that matter. So, let's move on to the fourth tip. Setups. Car setups and names. Naming in particular. Now this game can allow you to do whatever setup name you want. And I have seen some interesting names, let's just put it that way. So, as per suggestions and learning from the community, I have learned that you actually want to have a system that denotes what the temperature on the track is. The reason for this is because tire pressures For every track in every car, it is different and can be very difficult to keep track without having a native screen. Not screen. Yeah, scream is pretty funny, but I meant scheme. Because if you don't have one that makes sense or at least notifies, like, yeah, hey, what temperature for the air and track condition heat-wise was this for again? I personally have wasted 40 minutes at times when I was trying to understand this aspect of car tuning until I was informed or learned from others about this very important setup tip. Because trust me, you don't want to waste 40 minutes determining what your tire PSI was for a given setup you were tinkering with. It gets very daunting after a while if you don't have this kind of organization. Also, the last important tip for tip number 4 is every track, even in the same car, for example this Mercedes AMG 2015 version, or let's just say AMG GT3 non-Evo for short, is different. So this same car on the different track has to have a uniquely different setup, because the same exact setup for one track typically will not apply for the others. That's irrelevant of if it's just a tire pressure change. So the 5th and final tip is a 3-parter, is suggested practice ideas. For the first part of this final tip is when practicing, regardless of the car choice, having a form of a plan can help you learn the track and car a lot. The first thing to do when you're planning, once you've decided to practice on the track and pick the car, is my field of vision, or otherwise known as FOV, set up correctly? If you never practiced or raced in any car in the game, having the correct or better field of view adjustment is the very first thing I would suggest doing. If you're not using a VR headset, this tip will apply regardless if you have the world's biggest monitor or the world's smallest monitor. I don't care if you have a 40-inch monitor or a 10-inch monitor, although the last part is a joke. The fourth part is actually true. There is actually 40-inch monitors out there. My God, are they expensive. This is a very important thing you want to set up correctly, because I, like many others, do not have VR headset. Nor do I think I want one, to be honest. So, the reason for this is, yeah, you can go to other videos and see that they use calculators and all sorts of maths. And yes, you can mathematically figure this out too. And there are good videos out there if you like to use a math method, which is fine. Using math is totally okay. If you like it that way, that is fine. But for this game, I personally found using a 24-inch single monitor, going higher or lower than the value of 40 to 54. I'll put that on the screen for you. 40 to 54 is my suggested, based on lots of practice, a good range of numbers to play around with in Assetto Corsa Competizione. I have personally, when I hit continue here, you have to do this when you hit continue, is you press escape and go to view settings. I personally have picked, right here, field of view 48. Because if you go too much below 40, you can see the field of view kind of shrinks and makes it like a CNI fishbowl view. If you go beyond 54, you're now looking like you're staring off into the abyss. You might be saying, but Riggs, 90 looks so much better. I can see the mirror. It's like, well, yeah, but now you're so far away from the car, and you have this weird fishbowl camera lens effect, you could barely see anything else at this extreme end. I personally use 48, because I found that to be the best field of view for my 24-inch monitor situation. Another thing I would suggest to do is for the height. I personally use 3.1 right now as of recording for the AMG GT Non-Evo. The default height, when I move it down to here, for where I'm situated at, I personally found to be too low. I personally like it at 3.1 so I can see the track a little bit better. I personally recommend for height, not for all cars, but if you have a single monitor and your wheel is on, like, say, a table ghetto setup, I always want to have the height between 1 to 3.5, depending on the car. For some cars, you need to go a little higher or a little lower than this range, but typically if you go beyond 3.5, it tends to go too high off the camera. And what I'm trying to do with the height is I'm trying to match the wheel in this view, under this camera view, not only to match my wheel, per se, but also physically where my wheel is situated at. If I make it so it looks like this, instead of having it too high like I did earlier, it will feel kind of off. So you want to really fine tweak and tune this. And the last thing I will say with the view setting is be very careful when you adjust pitch, because setting a pitch to, say, for example, like this, can really throw off your vision. So you want to kind of fine-tune pitch if you find that to be necessary. For some people, it's not necessary, but I may consider playing around with this at some point. But I find if it looking upwards too much actually can hurt your physical neck too. So be very careful when you adjust pitch. It can really distort the view of the track. Final thoughts on the field of view suggestion is keep it consistent for the actual FOV. If you're satisfied, for example, like I am with 48, keep it to 48 for every car you drive. You can adjust all the other settings, but keep the field of view the same. That way, you retain the memory of the vision. That is a very important thing I've learned from a YouTube channel. I forgot the name of it though. I'll have to refresh my memory on that. But keeping the field of vision, regardless of sim and setup, is very important. Okay, so the second part of practice suggestion. Consider a more stable car for the series, whether if you're doing a GT3, which is the default, or if you got the DLC for GT4. For GT3, the recommended front-engine cars are the Bentley, Lexus, the BMW M4, not the M6, trust me, M6 is a nightmare to drive, or the Aston Martin V8 Vantage, not the V12. The V12 is pretty cool, but it's not as beginner-friendly as the V8. They're very good recommendations to try out because they're typically, under most situations, more stable. That doesn't mean for every track and every corner situation they are, but they are usually recommended for beginners, such as me. The mid-engine cars, such as the Ferrari 488 Evo, McLaren series, and the Audi, are mid-engine rear-drive cars. All GT3 and GT4 cars are rear-wheel drive. They just put the engine in different spots. The reason why mid-engine cars are typically not recommended if you're starting out or if you're still learning all these concepts or the game in general is they can be a bit too twitchy under certain cornering and maneuvering. That doesn't mean you can't ever attempt or try to enjoy them, such as, for example, the DLC Ferrari 488 Evo versus compared to, say, driving the Bentley. It's just that they have different driving dynamics that may not translate to certain other cars if you wish to change out. Also, regardless of this second sub-tip for the final one, not all cars are going to be as fast or stable if the track has rain, or if the balance of performance that can affect the aero adjustments. So for instance, some cars such as the Bentley may not do well on tracks such as Suiza. For example, they tend to like courses that are less nimble and more high speed cornering. That doesn't mean you can't use them or want to try it. It's just sometimes some tracks just suit certain cars better, or it's easier to learn, or harder to master. So take heed and ask around for the communities or comment chains or whatever to make sure you find what best suits for you. And that takes time and practice. So my last sub-tip for tip number 5 is, regardless for setups, the best one to start with if totally new to the game for adjusting setups is the safe preset. Now, it might be saying, but Riggs, that makes the car understeer like hell. Yes, that is true. Typically, the safe preset in the dry will make the car very prone to understeer. However, if you're just learning the game and just bought it and never done sim racing of any kind, or racing games in general, the safe preset for most cars, not all, there are some exceptions to this rule, actually make it more predictable. So that means is it's not going to fishtail if you slam it forward to gas the whole time. You might have a chance of saving the car way more often than doing the aggressive preset. The aggressive preset is what I would recommend after you do tire pressure calibration for the given track and temperature and situation. A suggested next step for the same car. So for example, you can click on safe preset, adjust the tire pressure based on PSI hot, and the optimal for hot for GT3 in the dry is in the 27 range, like 27.0 to 27.5. Do 4 to 6 laps of not crashing like Ricky Bobby and Talladega Nights. Go around, pull into the pits, or hit return to garage after you do 4 to 6 laps. Check the PSI hot and adjust accordingly. Once you get the PSI done and you have that consistent, then mess with stuff like electronics, fuel and strategy, mechanical grip, dampeners you save for last. I almost forgot to say that. And aero. Now, one last thing to regards to setting up tire pressure is make sure you also monitor your brakes. Don't set the brakes ducts too low, because for given track and temperature, if you set this too low, you'll overheat the tires and get false PSI readings. So the default 3 to 4 is typically good on most tracks, but that doesn't mean you stick to 3 to 4, 3 for the back and 4 for the front, because the front always are going to be hotter than the back, because that's where most of the work is done. That's just a suggestion. That doesn't mean you do this carte blanche for every car in every situation. You have to experiment and practice. That's what my suggestion is. You don't have to follow that. And I may adjust that based on situations as well, but that's what you want to do. And on that last sub-tip for the last practice suggestion, when you're doing these tire PSI calibrations, once you get that perfected, or at least more consistent with it, you may sometimes be so satisfied with the setup, you may not have to change anything except for electronics, which is traction control and ABS. And then you can just drive around and learn the track better, along with the car. So sometimes that can work out too. So those are my 5 tips for Assetto Corsa Competizione. I hope these tips really helped out. This is the first time I've ever done a more detailed tips and tricks kind of thing for any game for that matter. And I'd like to hear feedback or any suggestions in the comments or whatever, you know. It's the internet, so I don't know how good or popular this will ever be, but my hope and expectation is that at least it helps somebody out there, because I spent a good amount of time trying to dig through and learn this stuff too, and I thought maybe I'd cover it from a different approach from what I've seen on YouTube. So, hope you liked this video. This is Rigsters Journey, signing off.